Welcome back to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World, our 2022 conference. We are joined today by Roger Mader. He's the co-founder and CEO of Ampersand. Roger, welcome back. Nice to see you again.
Thanks, Glenn. Good to be here.
Your topic today is reveal hidden markets. Look forward to that. Let me hand it off to you, and I will join you on the backside. Our chat is open, our Q&A is open. I will keep an eye on that as you work your way through.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm just going to share my screen then. The notion again today is revealing hidden markets. And what I want you to understand, what my clients are clearly focused on, is understanding how they can meet unmet needs in the marketplace, oftentimes hidden in plain sight. I'm going to share with you a case study that helps to make this quite vivid, and a tool that you can use to do this for yourself. Again, my name is Roger Mader, and just to give you a sense of my qualifications to speak with you today, I help big companies act small and small companies get big as the CEO and founder of Ampersand. Work with lots of both businesses and B2B businesses and consumer businesses, a lot in healthcare. I've also played an executive role at a number of businesses, and I teach at the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan and as a guest lecturer in a number of other venues you'd be familiar with. More importantly, let's talk about what it takes to create a transformative understanding of new markets so that you can go get them. You may recognize this if you've been in New York, where I'm based. This is the Lincoln Center, home to the New York Metropolitan Opera, which, like most operas in the United States, had been dying a death since the turn of the century and the advent of digital media. So much so that the New York Metropolitan Opera went in desperation searching for a new director outside of the traditional confines of the opera itself. And they came up with Peter Gelb as their candidate for general manager. Gelb arrived to speak with the board and said, "Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be speaking with the premier opera of the United States. However, I don't know anything about the opera. Why am I here?" And they said, "Well, Peter, we've spoken to everybody who's anybody in the opera field, and none of them have a good answer for us in how to turn around the decline of classical arts and the opera in particular. You, however, have been the head of Sony Classical Music, which went through a transformational turnaround. So we thought you might know something that we need to know, and we'd like to speak with you about it." And he said, "Okay, I just need you to answer two questions for me. First question, what is the average age of your subscriber base today?" And they flipped through some papers and came back with something like 70 years of age. And he said, "Okay, that's a bit senior for targeting your growth for the future. More importantly, what was the average age of subscribers 10 years ago?" A little bit more paper flipping, quick calculation, 60 years old. And he said, "Right, you are on a death march, and you will exit the planet at the rate of your subscribers exiting the planet. So we have to do something dramatic to turn it around. And the reason I pose these questions is I need to understand that you and I both agree what this curve looks like. It is a steep downward trajectory, and you're going to drop off a cliff, which means we have to go do things differently. We have to find new markets." They agreed in principle. Now, this in my work where I'm helping clients with innovation is the really dangerous part, where people agree to do something bold without really appreciating what that takes. So often what you'll find is it's useful to present some hypotheses about some challenges that you might force them to take on. Gelb, being new to this kind of transformation, just went out and looked at the opera itself. And what he saw was majestic costumes, of course, the premier vocal performers in the field, historic content and performances well known to audiences. But what he also saw were often large, immobile performers who were singing about dramatic action, but standing stationary while doing so. When he went out and looked at the preferences for their customers, what he found was they cared about vivid live performance. They were coming to see a live performance, not go to a movie, but they weren't going to a concert because they not only cared about the soaring music, but the thematic storyline and the staging and the costumes and the dramatic narrative were all part and parcel of why people would come to the opera. And when they rated it on a scale, the vertical scale here you see from boring to captivating, what he found was the highest ranking feature was the soaring music itself, the vocal performers. But the live performance isn't that vivid. The thematic storytelling is solid, but the staging isn't that interesting, again, because the performers are largely stationary. In order to figure out what was necessary to win the next generation. So he's now going to have to go after a new audience that doesn't today take in the opera. What he had to do was find a place where people valued these same characteristics, but were spending good money and were showing themselves to be in a growth market. And here's what he found. That is Cirque du Soleil, and Cirque du Soleil compares favorably to the opera on many of the characteristics that we've just seen. Amazingly, the video you just witnessed is not to recruit customers, it's to recruit performers. That was a recruiting film because Cirque du Soleil was founded by a group of acrobats and performers, musicians, makeup artists in Quebec. They were street performers not that long ago. And very quickly, because of their popularity, they came under a large tent and scaled up and scaled broadly so that now you can see live performances in many of the major cities of the world. If you go to Las Vegas, you can see about 6 different stage performances at any given time because they've now divided up by different kind of musical genres and different performance themes. And Cirque du Soleil is a mesmerizing performance that differs primarily from the opera in that it doesn't have star performers. It doesn't feature the individual, and it also doesn't feature the sung performance. It's rather live or recorded music, typically live music, but it's performed either as original works or sometimes as thematic works from groups like the Beatles that they'll have set an entire show to. It's quite different from traditional circuses in that it doesn't have animal acts and it doesn't have performances in the way that you might have experienced from Ringling Brothers or others like that. It's a really spectacular experience, staged very much like the circus and very much like the opera today. When you compare the features that were described for the opera against the aspirations of this next generation audience, what you'd find was it rates in a different way. It represents a different curve. It only concedes to the opera on the soaring music. The opera wins out with live performances. When you have Luciano Pavarotti or any of the major vocal talents that are recognized by the audience, clearly that's going to be a strong draw for the opera. But in terms of a vivid live performance, the Cirque du Soleil rated higher on that, the storyline, the staging, the costumes, and the dramatic narrative. If you're familiar with many traditional operas, what you'll find is that dramatic narrative is almost like a classical soap opera. It's quite simple. If you look at La Boheme or Cinderella or any of the other traditional and very familiar storylines of Swan Lake, they're all brilliant stories, but they're very simple. And one of the things that we saw with Cirque du Soleil is that the interpretation of the narrative broadened much more for the audience. Now, one of the things for you to recognize in this transformation was that he compared old versus new, and then sought ways to differentiate, because he clearly wasn't going to create Cirque du Soleil. He wasn't going to compete with that. He was still going to be the opera, but Gelb saw an opportunity to split the difference here by adding a new curve to elevate the opera, keeping the soaring music at the state that it was already recognized at, but elevating the performance, the staging, the costumes, etc. To do it, he had to go in front of the board and say, remember I told you we were going to have to do some difficult things? And he showed them the photograph of the artist that he wanted to bring on staff. And she is a trained opera performer, but she is even more impressive as a gymnast and acrobat. And he said, she's not going to be the best singer we've ever had, but when they're singing about sword fights in the opera today, she's going to be performing a sword fight, and she might be doing it on a trapeze. And we are going to regain the interest of an audience that is used to an action-packed performance. He got permission not before getting death threats, amazingly. The New York Post circa 2007 and 8 would show you that the man received death threats for the changes he was meant to imbue on the opera. And I struggle to imagine who is sitting out a death threat. I'm imagining some socialite in her pearls, clutching them feverishly, wondering how he's going to screw up the opera. The result was, if you'll notice on the right-hand edge here, he also added a really breakthrough addition to the opera, which was an omni-channel strategy, meaning that in many theaters around the world now, you can see the New York Metropolitan Opera performed live. And in so doing, you also have recordings that become part of a historic trove of value and a portfolio for other uses, as well as creating clips for social media, et cetera. So by introducing a cinematic experience, a digital recorded experience of live performances, he introduced a more profitable venue, a more profitable channel for the opera going forward, because it was perpetual, and it allowed it to be performed in larger audiences, and allowed it to be repeated over time, and allowed it to be repurposed for other uses. The tool that I just depicted for you, the chart that showed you the desired aspirations of your target audience and good versus bad and a rating system, was first conceived by Professors Kim and Moborn in 1999 in a pivotal Harvard Business Review article entitled Creating New Market Space. If you recognize those names, it might be because they took the thesis of this concept and turned it into a book called Blue Ocean Strategy, which has become a leading book for MBA students in particular, and anyone else studying business strategy. The notion of blue ocean strategy is that you're going to go to the blue ocean, find uncontested space, versus the red ocean, where plenty of sharks are already circling. So what are the lessons for doing this? If you wanted to apply this to yourself, and it doesn't just have to be to renovate your current offering, it can be, as in this case, to understand the aspirations of a new audience. And that might be, in this case, a next generation audience. It could be a different demographic. It might be Hispanic, or it might be a different geographic market. You might be looking into Latin America or Eastern Europe. In order to do that, what we recommend to you is that first, what you do is you forecast entropy. or misery in this case. What I mean by that is that we all make the mistake as human beings, and this is well now demonstrated through behavioral economics, that as human beings, we tend to forecast the future in a straight line, rather than recognizing that constant changes in the marketplace and among competition means that whatever we offer today is less valuable tomorrow and 10 times less valuable over time, because new alternatives are arising, the desires and the aspirations of your market are changing, typically elevating, maybe altering, and if you're static, you're dying. So what you should do with your audience is to make sure, your business audience, people are going to pay for this. You need to help them understand that staying static is slowly dying. It's not being safe. It's actually the more dangerous option. Number two, you need to demonstrate desirability as your first priority. Let me explain this. When you're creating something new, it has to meet 3 criteria. It needs to be desirable to your target audience, your customers. It needs to be viable. It means that it presents an economic return, economically viable. And of course, it has to be technically feasible. Desirable, feasible, viable, 3 characteristics. Think of it as a Venn diagram, and at the middle of that is a successful new offer. When you're testing a concept, test first that it's desirable. Far too often what you find is that people do things because they can, it's feasible, or it represents huge profit, so it's viable. But if it's not desirable to the end customer, it's a waste of time. So start there and make sure that you have got something that somebody wants to buy before you're investing behind it further. Speak the language of your customer. Speak to the desires that they are seeking to fulfill, not your internal business language, not the language of the design that you're using to bring this about. Prove preference. What I mean by that is, if I'm going to put Cirque du Soleil forward versus the opera, versus a transformed opera, I need to test to make sure that I'm winning preference based on the way that I've interpreted this. So in step 2, I define desirability. I understand what people want. I need to make sure that the solution I've come up with, the new offering, meets those desirability factors. Remember not to benchmark against the competition. That just becomes a game of competing against each other on form factors and features that everybody can compete on. They can see each other competing on them. And ultimately what happens is you end up competing on price. Leapfrog the competition by looking at the best experience beyond the industry. So the New York Metropolitan Opera didn't look at the other operas. They didn't look at European operas. They said, what are the features most desired and what's the greatest growth trajectory out there that's practicing those features? And measure against your buyer criteria. Make sure you're measuring against the things that your target market care about. As you go through this exercise, by the way, from step 1, where you're just forecasting the danger of the status quo, and 2, where you're understanding what you need to do to create a new preferred product or experience or service, all the way through to when you're measuring them, you'll find that you're learning all along the way. And so those buyer criteria may alter, especially after they've become used to whatever your new launch is. You'll find that you can refine it quite a bit from what you initially understood. If you're going to do this as an exercise for yourself, what I'd suggest you do is create a simple grid where you identify the features that matter to your target audience. Don't talk about the features you offer today, but rather step back, get out of your own shoes, get into their shoes, understand what frustrates them, what annoys them, what they consider the expense point to be, what they prefer as demonstrable choice alternatives, and then extrapolate the things that they prefer to what the ideal might be. Define those needs along the bottom axis. Create a vertical scale from whatever are the criteria from bad to good, so that you want it, which could, you could even go negative, so that you're judging this from the buyer's perspective of desirability. Map your current offering, check against 1 or 2 alternative or complementary vehicles that provide against the same criteria. There's lots of sources you can use for this that might be available to you already. Google has become incredibly sophisticated for those who know how to use it appropriately, not just as consumers the way we use it today, but you can do trend analyses and you can explore it in the body of Google documents. There's something called Google Scholar that will allow you to study the publicly available educational materials, including thesis works from master's and PhD students, etc. You, as a corporate member, may have lots of internal resources available to you. And if you're prepared to spend for outside resources, I strongly recommend you to NetBased Quid, which is a tool for looking at both social and text-based big data in order to analyze the marketplace based on the conversations taking place in the marketplace. The Gardner Forrester are data sources, depending on your industry, that can be very useful. GLG, the Gerson Lehman Group, is a team of experts who you can call upon. They tend to be executives, former executives, board members from industry, deep technical specialists, et cetera. So it's your way to tap into experts. And there's many other sources like this. Lastly, I would encourage you to remember that it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one most adaptable to change. Your job here is to make sure you're constantly adapting by understanding the changing needs of your target market and exceeding them. Thank you very much. My name is Roger Mader. My email is roger@ampersand.vc. Feel free to reach out with questions as they arise or occur to you. But let me hand it over to Glenn in order to play out some of those questions now.
All right, Roger, fantastic. Well, a couple things. Personally, as the father of a daughter of a aspiring musical theater performer, thank you for showing me that there's still hope.
There is hope. Good for her.
Congratulations. Which is great. Yeah, Cirque Du Soleil. I mean, they do some amazing stuff. And you're right. They did the Beatles. They did a whole thing with Elvis in Vegas, where they modernized kind of all the 50s songs and movie songs and did a spectacular job. You know, it's interesting on the opera with the omni-channel point. Kind of reminds me, it's a little bit of a throwback. You know, those of us that remember, Ali Frazier, right? The closed circuit boxing in theaters, right?
That was a breakthrough, that's going on today still with MMA.
Yeah,
performance.
Yeah. So I mean, I tell you, he give Peter lots of credit for sure. Interesting stat though, when he looked at it, right? That as his subscribers were aging, so was his product, right? I mean, talk about, I mean, we just came off Memorial Day and D-Day here. I mean, he was kind of like they were kind of like on the Bataan Death March. I mean, they were kind of like marching along that crooked road in Malaysia, and before you know it, that they're not going to make it. So kudos to him for recognizing that and moving it forward like that for sure. You look at sometimes people market more to themselves, and I think when you say speak the language of your customer, that really brings it home, doesn't it? Know who you're talking to, know who you're marketing, know who the buyer is, right? Know what they may be otherwise interested or attracted to, and then kind of muscle up that way, as it plays out.
That's right, Glenn. I think that it's so easy. It's unintentionally lazy that when we become experts in our solution, that we double down on that. We're sort of focused on the product, not the customer. And that's, of course, what happened with the opera. And it's a very natural phenomenon that happens in many industries where particularly in manufacturing, where you're building a product, and Toyota pioneered the Total Quality Initiative 40 years ago, 50 years ago now, that caused you to constantly be improving and refining your capabilities, which is brilliant and allowed Toyota to become the largest automotive company in the world against all odds in an entrenched industry populated by Detroit. But they simultaneously were forever doing the market research to understand, particularly the US market, because to them it was a foreign market. Right? So they were studying that market like they were studying aliens, and had to understand it in depth rather than take it as a default understanding that so often happens with you when you continue to operate in the same market. and you don't recognize the changes that are happening over time.
Yeah, no, I mean, your graph, it's kind of I just said, kind of a simple way to look at it, but focus on the features that matter, not what you offer, and trying to shoehorn it into, well, of course this is going to work. Come back and get some feedback, and your research tools there that you put up on towards the end. Basic blocking and tackling, but very very helpful. Very the use of experts is a great idea, right? Because there's always somebody out there who you could call on who might have that experience as well. And you do a lot with you see a lot with agile transformation now, and that's all about adaptability, as you put up on your last adaptable to change, your last slide, and that kind of like brings it all home, right? Keep reinventing yourself, thinking ahead. Don't think that you always have the answers. Be open and be a good listener, certainly, as you look at what your customers may or may not want, right? It's not like we're pushing this product today. Let's we're selling this, right? It's like, well, tell me what you want, and let me find a way to meet those needs, right?
Right.
Without a doubt. Well, listen, Roger, thanks for joining us. You're always great. It's Roger Mader, co-founder, CEO of Ampersand, and it's Reveal Hidden Markets. Really appreciate the presentation today on leading entrepreneurs. You embody that for us all the time.
All right, and congratulations to all your entrepreneurs. You guys, thank you very much for your time today.
Terrific. Good seeing you. See you next time. Thanks, Roger.
Cheers.
Bye.